The summit level up is a term used to describe the perceived improvement in performance that happens to a vote-in player after getting to consistently play against some of the best players in the world during their time in the Summit House. But does the summit level up actually exist, or are Melee fans seeing a pattern where one doesn't exist? Well, with this video, we're going to take a shot at answering this question. So to first properly tackle this question, we need to create a method for assigning a value to a tournament performance. And instead of creating one from scratch, which would be subpar at best without significant testing, I chose to instead slightly modify the ELO rating change formulas to make the values more compatible with Melee results. So let's talk about how this system works. If you're not interested in understanding the mathematics behind these valuations, feel free to skip ahead to the time on screen. The ELO system can basically be boiled down to this singular formula that determines how many rating points a player gains or loses after a match. This formula contains three variables that need to be explained a bit further: rating, P or probability, and K factor. Rating is an expression of how good a player is and is often determined by a player's performance at their first tournament and built upon from there using the main formula. A player's top 100 ranking serves essentially the same purpose, so we'll be using that to find a player's rating using the formula on screen alongside a few examples of some players' ratings using the 2018 ranking. P, or probability, uses the ratings of the two players facing off to determine how likely one player is to win, which is then used to give more or less rating points for a win, depending on how difficult of a match it was expected to be. For example, Swedish Delight had a slightly less than 50% chance to win against SVAT when they met at Shine 2018 using this formula, because he was only a single rank away from him, whereas his likelihood to beat Hungrybox at the Big House 8 was only about a 20% chance because of the larger rank gap between them. This part of the formula translates pretty well to Smash, so nothing needs to be adjusted here. Lastly, we have K factor, which is a value that further amplifies the amount of rating points that a player drops or climbs after a match. The World Chess Federation and the United States Chess Federation both have different sets of K factor values that they use at different rating levels, so there's no one standard to base our selection off of. But after trying out a handful of different values, I ran into an issue. A large portion of the tournament performances for Summit vote-ins were being considered negative because of the huge amount of points lost by dropping two sets, which is guaranteed to happen to every single player at a traditional double elimination tournament except the person who wins the event. So to remedy this issue, I created two separate formulas, adjusted the constants, and used two different K factors so that losses don't take away as much from a player's overall performance at an event, but still have an impact. So then with this adjusted valuation formula, we add up all the players' wins against players who were top 100 during that ranking period and all of their losses at the event to determine performance value at each particular event. To try our best to mitigate the effect of other factors on a player's performance, we're only going to use 3 to 5 events before and after their Summit appearance. For players with high tournament attendance, congruence of size of events and minimal amount of time away from their appearance at Summit are the factors used to determine which events are chosen. The key metric that we are going to focus our time on is difference in average performance, or DAP, which subtracts a player's average performance value from before Summit from their average performance value after Summit to determine how the quality of their tournament results have changed. To help understand DAP a little better, you can think of it like this. A DAP value of -20 would be the equivalent of dropping a single rank on the top 100 for every major you attend. So a player who puts up an average performance at a major of -10 and attends 10 majors in a year would have a net performance value of -100, dropping them the equivalent of 5 ranks on the top 100. So with that all out of the way, we're going to look at every player's results individually, but I've created a rule of thumb to make DAP a little bit easier to understand. Players with a -5 or less DAP have declined following Summit. Players with a DAP greater than -5 but less than 5 have stayed the same after Summit, and players with greater than 5 have felt the effects of the Summit level up. So finally, with all that groundwork laid, let's look at some DAP values starting with Summit 1. Let's begin with the sole player who is said to have declined after Summit 1, Kage. As you probably guessed, I would be ludicrous to say that attending Summit makes someone a worse player, but the burnout caused from playing so much Melee in a short period of time could very realistically cause a decline in performance after the event. But this doesn't appear to be the case for Kage. Across the 8 events that are used to evaluate him, he only has a singular top 100 win against La Luna at the Big House 5, and when we take out that outlier, his DAP drops to a no change value of 0.70, which more accurately represents what happened. SVAT's results tell the same same story we've heard from him forever. He generally beats the players who he's expected to beat, and he loses to the players he's expected to lose against, which makes him correctly identified as not having changed by Summit. S2J does fall into the no change category using the rule of thumb, but I think he may be our first example of the Summit level up in action. His average performance value before Summit is marred by 4 losses to players ranked lower than him, and is carried heavily by his run at Smash the Record, where he only dropped a single set to a player ranked lower than him. And after Summit, he only put up a single negative performance value across the 5 events, which could be seen as an improvement in consistency. Conversely, it could be argued that it was Smash the Record where his improvement started instead, and Summit just happened to be the first event after it. So I think it's able to be argued either way, but we're going to classify it as a level up in action for now, but it will be represented with an asterisk next to it and treated as such. Now we move on to players who are said to have improved after Summit 1, starting with Zoo. And with a quick look at his performance values, you can see that he clearly gets carried by the extreme outlier of EVO 2016, and without it, he's pushed back into the no change after Summit category where he belongs. Alex19 provides us with another interesting case, as his 2 biggest performances came right before and right after Summit, with CEO 2016 being the only other of the 8 events that made any sort of significant impact. His losses stay about the same and maybe even decline after Summit, as he picks up 3 quality wins on the other side compared to his singular one over Hugs at the Big House 5. It's another judgment call situation, so I'm going to classify it as another Summit level up with an asterisk for now. My hesitancy to call a performance a clear example of the Summit level up may have you wondering what exactly that would look like. So, take a look at Swedish Delight. Only a singular bad loss to a player post Summit, quality wins at nearly every event, and exclusively positive performance values, 4 out of 5 which are 15 or greater. This then wraps up Summit 1, leaving us currently standing at 3 players with no change, 2 players who can be argued as having leveled up after Summit, and 1 player who clearly did level up. Now on to Summit 2, where we only have a single player who falls into the rule of thumb for improvement. Starting at the bottom again, we have Wobbles, who is the largest single event performance of any player on the list at Battle of the 5 Gods, where he netted 7 top 20 wins. This happened before Summit, and is obviously why his DAP is so low, and with his outlier removed, he falls to a much more reasonable no change at a DAP of 1.2. Duck was on a bit of a hot streak from late 2015 into early 2016, most notably beating Leffen at DreamHack Winter. But while he put up solid performances in the second half of 2016 following Summit, he wasn't able to put up a single 20+ point performance across the 5 events, whereas he put up 3 before Summit. These results are probably the closest we've seen to a decline after Summit so far, but because his decline fell solely on not picking up as many big wins instead of dropping sets to worse players, it's more fair to classify this as a no change. S2J's second Summit appearance wasn't nearly as impactful as his first, with him only being able to put up a single positive valued performance at EVO 2016 that stands out as a clear outlier on his resume. Without it, his DAP falls to a pretty miserable negative 8.9, but like Duck, his losses stay on nearly the same level, trending slightly downwards after Summit, but not nearly enough to say that his attendance at Summit 2 had adverse effects. There's nothing real to say about Ice, as his pre and post Summit results look almost identical, making him the clearest candidate for a no change distinction that we've seen so far. The same story continues on with PPU, having similar highs and lows on both sides of his Summit 2 appearance, but interesting to note, he's the first player on this list who got auto-invited to a Summit because of their rank, but then had to fight as a vote-in to get in at a later event. This then brings us to the final vote-in of Summit 2, Esam, who is the greatest average DAP improvement following Summit of any player. And the values here definitely do show pretty cut and dry the Summit level up happening for the Samus main, jumping from only having a singular win against Alex19 at Paragon to pulling 6 top 100 wins across 4 events. At the end of Summit 2, we now sit at 7 players being classified not changing following Summit, 2 players who can be argued as having leveled up after Summit, and 2 players who have shown clear signs of the Summit level up. Summit 3 not only contains 3 repeat vote-ins, but is the first group that doesn't have a single player with a DAP value greater than 5. The lowest of the guys in this group is La Luna, and he has the unfortunate distinction of being the first player who got worse after Summit. He had respectable results at every tournament before Summit, but in the 3 events soon after, he didn't pull in a single top 100 win and only had 1 positive performance in the 5 used. I want to reiterate that I'm not saying that attending Summit made La Luna worse, but the numbers do show a significant drop-off in quality of performance. Pew Pew is back again for his 3rd summit appearance and his 2nd time as a votant, and it's exactly the same as last time, with him having a slightly lower DAP that still falls into the no change category because he wasn't able to quite match his runs at EVO, SmashCon, and the Big House after Summit. Mafia has one of the closest DAP values to 0 of anyone on this list due to how symmetrical his pre and post summits are. 3 quality performances, and 2 lackluster ones on both sides. It's interesting to note that La Luna accounts for 3 of his top 100 wins, and when you remove him from those events, Mafia falls just short of the gotten worse threshold at -4.3. Despite his electric play, Nun's readout serves as just another boring no change that has slightly higher peaks on the post-summit side that pushes him into the positive end of no change. And although Duck initially looks like he's in a better, or at least slightly different place than last summit, he's still pretty much the same. At best, we keep Full Bloom 3 in and ignore how he's got so many more bad losses after Summit and say that he stayed about the same, and at worst, we see Full Bloom as an outlier, remove it, and put him up to a -9 DAP and say that Duck got worse. As a compromise between those two, we'll classify Duck at Summit 3 as a no change with a negative asterisk. We finish off Summit 3 with our 3rd appearance from S2J, who's gone from leveling up to a negatively tinged no change to now a clear example of the Summit level up. He gets this status after we remove EVO, the only positive event in his front 5 and a huge outlier, which causes his already respectable DAP to nearly double. Going from 4 lukewarm performances into 3 solid showings right after Summit makes him a no-brainer for the level up distinction for me. About halfway through, we stand at 1 player whose results declined following Summit, 11 who stayed about the same, and 4 who demonstrated the Summit level up effect. Let's keep on moving over to Summit 4, where we only have 5 players to look at this time, because Infinite Numbers took a pretty lengthy break from attending major Melee events after Summit, so we don't really have any great data to use for him. But we still got 5 other guys to talk about, starting with Ice. Ice's legendary run to 3rd place at the Big House 6 sits with UGC and Don't Park on the Grass to put up a pretty beefy pre-Summit run that he didn't come anywhere close to matching after the event. But it doesn't look like his downturn started at Summit, but instead at Genesis 4, where he met with 3 top 100 Ices in bracket and lost to both Army and DizKid. Him only picking up a singular win at the Summit event itself supports this theory, so we're going to place Ice in the no change negative asterisk category. S2J4 is quite a special case because you can see a Summit level up from 3 going on in his results here, but that upward path appears to stop right after Summit 4. His performance at the event itself does appear to hint at that, with him barely winning a singular set against Infinite Numbers. He even lost the 2 players he beat before Summit in his 5 big events after that, so with that in mind, S2J at Summit 4 is going to be classified as our 2nd Summit appearance that slowed down a player's momentum. With Chu's results, we get a glimpse into how he has stayed a relevant and consistent threat for as long as Melee has existed. And to no one's surprise at all, a weekend at the Summit House didn't magically change the performance of one of Melee's greatest players of all time, so he's put into the no change group. Let's then finish off Summit 4 with the future Dignitas pair with obscenely high DAPs, Lucky and Hugs. Lucky's results look like a standard carried by an outlier readout, but even when we remove his crazy EVO 2017 run, he still falls above the 5 DAP threshold for the level up. And when you look close at the players he beat on both sides, it really does look like he improved. He went from beating the players he's supposed to beat by rank, to taking a win that's an upset by rank at nearly every event. So for me, he's yet another example of the Summit level up. And funnily enough, Hugs has a pretty similar story. His crazy run came at CEO Dreamland, and his DAP still stays above 5 without it included, but his improvement isn't as clear-cut as he continued to suffer some questionable losses after Summit. But he did go from 0 upset by rank wins to 2, or 6 if we include Dreamland, and his losses are bad on both sides of the coin, so with that in mind, he barely squeaks in as a Summit level up candidate for me. So with only 15 candidates left with enough data, we've got 9% of players having gotten worse following Summit, 62 who experienced no noticeable change in performance, and 29% who showed signs of a level up. Continuing on the Summit 5, we only have 5 candidates again because Blea took a pretty lengthy break from attending major events, so we don't have enough data for him. So with that out of the way, let's look at S2J at Summit for the 5th and final time. He's got 2 level ups, 1 hasn't gotten worse, and 1 decline in performance under his belt coming into Summit 5, which is his lowest DAP yet, and the 4th lowest unadjusted DAP of any player. And even when we take out his amazing outlier run at Shine, his DAP still sits at a not very pretty -8. He didn't necessarily perform bad before or after Summit, but him not being able to recapture that magic that was there before Summit leads me to add him to the decline in performance wall of shame yet again. As for my case, we've seen tons of these no change results already, so let's not spend any more time here than we need to on him. Nothing has changed and there are no results of note here. Hax's appearance at Summit 5 happened right as he was beginning to climb back to the top with his new box controller, so the improvement we're seeing here is partially his natural progression as he gets more familiar with his new controller, but it would be wrong to say that grinding friendlies at Summit did not contribute to expediting the process. So I think many would agree that Hax at Summit 5 is a pretty clean example of the Summit level up in action. And Crush went from performing relatively well to consistently crushing it after Summit by grabbing a top 20 win at all 5 events after Summit after not being able to grab a single one at the events before. This improvement, which manifests itself with a hefty 22.5 DAP, is yet another example of a player who appears to have made the most out of their time in the Summit house. And finishing up, we have Amsa, who is probably the best looking resume of any player we're taking a look at in this video, as he does not have a single negative event performance value, and his lowest performance value is 13.7, which makes it no surprise that he is the second highest DAP of any player. And with such a big DAP and a net performance value of 250, which is the equivalent of climbing 12 ranks in the top 100, Amsa for sure leveled up at Summit 5. We're already running pretty long for this video, so we're going to skip the recap this time and go right into Summit 6 talk with Ginger. To put it bluntly, Ginger's performances after Summit are bad. So bad in fact that he is the lowest unadjusted DAP of any player. Even when we go as far to leave him with 2 pre-events and remove Full Bloom 4, he's still very cleanly in the negative change category. And so, Ginger becomes the 4th player to clearly have worse results after Summit. After Ginger, we've got Hugs, who started 2018 with a string of great events, picking up wins over Amsa and Zayn along the way, but wasn't able to replicate that success in the second half of the year after Summit. Genesis 5 does stand tall as an outlier even in the sea of quality pre-Summit performances, and without it, Hugs teeters on the edge of the no change category at a negative 6.5 DAP. So it comes down to a judgment call. His losses are fairly comparable on both sides of the Summit, barring his less than stellar Gommel, and he's really just 1 or 2 hallmark wins away from getting below -5, so his performance really hasn't changed too largely, so we'll classify him as a no change with a negative asterisk because of this gray area. Toussaint continues on the seemingly cursed Summit event with another not too pretty post-Summit resume. Shine is the only thing that saves his performances from being dragged down to the depths of DAP hell, but it does stand as a pretty clear outlier among those performances. So with this, Summit 6 becomes the first and only event in the series to have 2 invitees having declined in performance following the event. I understand more than anyone else that Westballs is an extremely inconsistent player, and his readout from his Summit 6 performance agrees with that statement. Newts, Oakland, and Runback both stand on each side as diamonds in the field of passable to not great performances that sit around them, and with both of them gone, West settles into a no change value of -2.4, which is much more true to how Summit has appeared to affect him. Amsa's Summit 6 resume isn't as incredible as his one from Summit 5, but there's still a ton of quality performances here. This time, they're even more spread out across pre and post Summit, making him an easy inclusion in the no change box. There's not much more to say other than 2018 was a good year for Zayn both before and after Summit, so no change. And we're going to skip that wrap up yet again because we only have 4 more players to look at because of how recent Summit 7 is and how little data we have on these players. There's especially not much data for Rishi after Summit because he really hasn't attended much, but what he did attend is littered with bad losses, probably at least partially due to the fact that he was splitting his focus between Melee and Ultimate after its release. So because of this greater level of uncertainty we have about what role Summit played, I'm going to play it safe and not place him in a category. But when we come back to this video when we have more data, I'll be willing to give a more firm opinion on him. KJH is yet another clean example of someone who did not appear to be affected by Summit at all, with his 1 or 2 better wins before the event pushing him to the negative side of the no change rule of thumb. And with Swedish Delight, we see this story immediately repeated again, with his better wins deciding to show up after Summit. But still, he's yet another player who didn't seem to be largely affected by Summit. And last but not least, we have Sloths. Much like Rishi, he hasn't attended many larger events since his Summit appearance, and his showing at King where he picked up wins over Swedish and Cobalt is a clear outlier, giving us only 2 post-Summit events to draw a conclusion from. So like Rishi, we're gonna wait and stay on the side of caution by also not putting him in any category until we have enough data. So there we finally go. 36 Summit invitees. So how do these final results shake out? So we have a grand total of 5 players who have the unfortunate distinction of having declined in performance following Summit, with Summit 6 producing the most of these players at 2. We then have 21 players who are categorized with some form of the no change distinction, with Summit 2 being the most vanilla Summit, producing 5 players who stay the same. And lastly, we have 10 total players who appear to have noticeably improved following their attendance at a Summit event, with Summit 1 and 5 both being tied for the top spot by producing 3 improved players each. All this data finally then brings us to this video's titular question: does the Summit level up actually exist? And I think my answer stays the same as when we took a look at this data set before. The level up for sure exists, and rapid improvement following the event is seen in some players, but is not nearly as prominent as people believe it to be. Attending Summit doesn't magically just make someone a better player, as seen by the handful of people who appear to get worse after being at the event. And again, it's important to remember that the mathematics, if you could even call them that are being used here are very fast and loose and require many subjective choices to be made at various points in the collection and analysis process. So by no means should you take this analysis as gospel, but I do wholeheartedly agree with the conclusion that this data pushed us to. This data set is super interesting to me, and I'll be sure to continue updating it as the years go on to potentially produce a 3rd video in the series when the time is right. But there are a few more interesting aspects of this dataset we have now that I didn't have time to look into in this already extremely lengthy video that I'd love to take a look at in a follow-up video if you guys are interested in something like that. And with all the moving parts in this video, there's almost certainly some errors I'll have to correct as well. So with that being said, if there are any questions you think I could answer with this dataset, or things you'd want me to look into in said follow-up video, let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video and stuck around this entire time, consider subscribing to the channel or supporting me over on Patreon. And that about does it for me. I've been SaveAsUntitled, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.